Hello, my oodles and noodles. We are back from the floor of my girlfriend's condo, here to speak of one of the best books I've ever read in my life in fantasy realms. I wanted to talk today about Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings, the first book in the Stormlight archives, which is Brandon's first attempt at a epic series. Before this, he basically wrote still relatively large books, but he had the Mistborn series, he had Elantris, he had more smaller, most of them weren't even series, most of them were standalone books, until he had written the last three novels in Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time. He hadn't ever really written anything of a large format, so this is really his first foray. We are actually 4 books into the series now. The 5th book is on its way, and so he's gotten quite adept at it, and I'm quite behind on doing a review. So let's delve in. This series is possibly one of the most difficult to talk about because it's just so damn large. The first book is 1,000 pages. The other books are all 1,000 pages. It's really, really large. In some ways, that's really great. Probably one of the most interesting and incredible aspects of the book is that it's written in a way that really is perfect. I mean, this book is made to be an anime. It just is. Everything from the combat scenes to the magic systems to the philosophical aspects of the book to the characters, everything to the enemies, everything is made and would look phenomenal as an anime. It would also look great as a game. Just the mechanics of it and how things work would look really, really well. So one of the highlights of the series is its combat scenes. It's got some really, really phenomenally written combat scenes, especially with one of our main characters, Kaladin. So that we have 3, I suppose you could say 4, but really just 3 main characters within this book: Kaladin, Shaolin, and Dalinar. Our 4th would possibly be Seth, who is more of a villain, although he's a bit of a complicated character. And these 3 or 4 main characters are basically coming to us at this time where there was a war going on between the Alethi, who basically are these, you could say, noble people from the kingdom of Alethkar, who are at war with the Parshendi, who are this group of sort of savage, I don't even want to call them human. They're human in nature, and yet at the same time they sort of seem to have some kind of insect-like qualities to them. They can grow carapace, and they can grow armor out of their skin, and they can change their forms. We don't really learn that much about them within the series, only that they have sort of a relation, a kind of cousin-like relation to what are known as Parshmen, who are sort of these docile people who live alongside most races of the world and are used sort of as slaves because they just kind of stand there unless you tell them what to do. And so people utilize them in many, many different ways. And they were sort of the only kinds of Parshmen that people knew until they ran into what they call the Parshendi, who then, unfortunately, during a peace treaty, murdered the king of the Alethi, Gavilar. And so this started this 6-year-long war, and we are coming into it from these perspectives of these 3 characters. As I said, Dalinar, Kaladin, and Shaolin. And Kaladin is sort of the central focus of book 1. He is this very, very young, he's only 19 years old when we're meeting him when the book starts. He's this very, very young slave. And we don't really understand at first why he's a slave. He does drop hints that he was betrayed and something really, really large happened, and we don't know why, but he's basically in this massive, massive depression when we first meet him. And Brandon, I think, does a pretty good job of showcasing someone who is going through a depressive state. I mean, obviously, unlike a lot of things that I think cause a lot of issues in our modern day societies and how people view depression, Kaladin obviously has a pretty legit reason. I mean, he's a slave. It's not that much of a better reason than that to be in a depressed state. And he is kind of flitting in and out, trying to find purpose. He's someone who we see through flashbacks and other things as someone who has a lot of a very strong sense of justice, who wants to push through and help people. He comes from a background of surgeons and helping people. He has something that was really, really pushed into him from his father, and where and how he grew up in terms of just wanting to take care of people. And unfortunately, the way his life rolled out, he just, I don't want to say failed, but he views it as a failure. He's lost many people. He's been screwed over in so many different ways, and now has ended up as this slave who basically has just given up on things. And so we're starting off the story with that and seeing his development as he grows and gets kind of thrust into so many different scenarios. The main one being that he is brought finally into the Alethi war camp, so where they are settled now, where they are fighting the Parshendi. Kaladin is brought in to be what's called a bridgeman. So there are multiple high princes within the Alethi kingdom, and then there's the king, who is the current king is the son of Gavilar, the one who was murdered. And Kaladin is made to be a bridgeman in Sadius's army, so one of the high prince's army. And they basically are used as fodder, as arrows, the arrow magnets. They're thrown out there in front of the army, carrying these huge bridges that they have to put in between these chasms that the armies have to cross. And Sadius does it on purpose to basically just throw slaves and people into these bridge crews so that the Parshendi waste arrows on them. And so it's a very hopeless scenario. So this is a guy who's already very young, has been broken already, who's coming to this already massively depressed, and he's thrust into these bridge crews, which is the most hopeless scenario of life. You're basically, you're nothing, and you're just there to take an arrow so that a soldier doesn't take one. And so this book, this specific book, The Way of Kings, is really, really focused on Kaladin's rise, how he comes out of this depressive state and refines himself and refines purpose. And it is very, very tied into the magic system of the series, which is, there are what are called spren. You can call them spirits, you can call them whatever you want, but they're basically the elemental natures of everything. But they're more than that also, because there are creation spren, there are pain spren, there are wind spren. So basically everything that we can think of that human beings kind of view can be spren. And you get a little bit of that in the series, where you start realizing that humans are actually shaping spren, that spren kind of are connected deeply to how people think and the actions people take, and we're sort of bringing them to life in a certain way. You see that there are multiple interludes within this book, which could be a bit of a strange choice from the author, because it's already a 1,000-page book to have these little interludes where we are introduced to random characters, and only once. You'll have one interlude where we see one character doing something that's never properly explained, and then we don't see the character again for the rest of the book. And this happens, I think, a good 6 or 7 times, where we're introduced to multiple characters. We see a scene, something is done, and then we don't see that character again for the rest of the book. And it's kind of redundant in a certain way. It does pull us out of the flow of the series, yet at the same time, in those small tiny interludes, usually just 2-3 pages, sometimes a bit more, we get a glimpse of other parts of the world, other peoples, other races. And so it's kind of it does pull us out of the flow, but it does interject a better understanding of how the world works. Many times the interludes, the characters who are speaking, they are doing things in regards to spren, so we start learning a little bit more about spren through these interludes. Of course, we are learning also about Seth, who is the main villain of this series, but again, not, because of his situation and his own background. I don't want to say too much due to spoilers, but he's a very interesting character. He's also one of the most irritating and frustrating characters. So much of what he does, he doesn't do because he wants to do it. He does it because other people tell him to do it, and due to the cultural background that he's coming from, he allows people to tell him to do these horrible things. And so it's a complete bullshit arc in terms of just allowing someone to completely offload all responsibility onto other people while they do horrible things and justify it through that. It's obviously, to anyone from our modern perspective, it's the most cowardly way of doing horrible stuff. You're just basically saying, well, it's not my choice. Yet he does have obviously more choice than probably any character in the books at this point, because he's so damn powerful. So it's a very, very interesting concept, yet simultaneously it's probably going to piss off a lot of people because he's just full of shit in a lot of ways. And especially when it's juxtaposed with a character like Kaladin, who has so little choice because of the scenarios that he's been thrust into, and yet keeps continuously trying his utmost best, even through all these difficult scenarios, to do what's right, to do what's best, to help people, even though he's been enslaved and beaten down and taken advantage of in so many ways. And so the juxtaposition of those two characters is really, really fascinating, and I'm sure it's going to be juxtaposed even more as the series goes on. We do have our two other main characters, so we have Shaolin and Dalinar. Shaolin, we don't see as much of her in this book, but she is a really interesting kind of offset comparatively between Dalinar and Kaladin, who are both, their arcs are very, very serious. And Shaolin's, of course, is serious as well. She's dealing with a lot of trauma as well, but there's much more of a research orientation, and there's a lot of wit and cleverness and humor that's kind of interjected into her chapters. And she's quite an interesting character. She is a bit childish, but you sort of understand it from the aspect of that she comes from a very cloistered, sheltered upbringing, and she didn't really have much interaction with the world outside of her home. She is coming from a rich family, so she comes out into this world right now, and she's trying to save her family. There has been some stuff that's happened back at home, and if she doesn't do something, her whole family is just going to crumble down around her. They're going to lose everything and possibly even be injured or killed. So she's trying to save her family, even though she's completely ignorant of the world outside. And she's trying to do this by going to Jasna, who is also, I would say, not a main character, but very, very important to the series in regards to, she eventually ends up becoming the mentor to Shaolin, and simultaneously Shaolin is trying to do something that would piss Jasna off quite a bit. So there's a great amount that we learn about the world through Shaolin's character arc. We learn a lot about the Alethi family, about what happened with Gavilar the King, the Parshendi, what started this war, and we learn a lot about the fables that go along this story, because throughout the whole entire book we were basically hearing about that there used to be these people called the Heralds, and they used to come and take care of us and help us because the desolations would come, and these desolations would destroy all the world because of these creatures called Voidbringers. And the Voidbringers are these magical entities that would come in and just fight with them and fight with the gods and then wreck the world, and then we would restart again. And now they've had this period of peace for thousands of years, and people think the Voidbringers are just myth. They think the Heralds are gods. There's a whole different aspect to it. And so through Shaolin, we're learning a little bit about that research, and through her interactions with Jasna, we're learning a little bit more about the Voidbringers. But the main thrust of where we learn about the past is actually through Dalinar's character arc. And Dalinar is one of the High Princes, and he's probably one of the most fascinating characters ever written as far as I'm concerned. He is this man who is basically, he was the brother of the king who was killed, Gavilar. He is obviously the uncle of the current king, Elhokar, and he is someone who used to be known as the Blackthorn. He was just this savage, barbaric high prince who just loved violence and drinking. He was just a very cruel person, and he's changed rapidly over the last 6 years, ever since his brother died, because he started reading this book known as The Way of Kings, which was written by this man known as Nohadon, who was this ancient king, and his ideals and thoughts were taken over and utilized by who were known as the Radiants. And the Radiants were supposed to be this order of knights, this order of mystical knights who fought against the Voidbringers, who protected the land, up until the time where they betrayed humanity and they left us, and you don't really know. It's all lost in the past. And Dalinar is basically trying to re-embody these codes that were pushed by Nohadon, pushed by the Radiants, where you're supposed to be, for all intents and purposes, a better person. And especially if you're someone who's in a position of leadership, you're supposed to be taking care of your people and inspiring inspiring them to a greater ideal. And so he's kind of been shunted and cast out by the other high princes, because especially coming from his background, he's just viewed as this conceited, arrogant like man who thinks he's better than everybody else, because he's looking down upon everybody, trying to get them to be better. And the other high princes just want to party and, you know, enjoy their lives and be rich and be little shits for all intents and purposes. And so that's another interesting juxtaposition, where we're seeing Kaladin's viewpoint of all these high princes, and his just being utilized by them as an arrow magnet, as I said before. Just everyone around him is being killed and murdered and just being used as toys and pawns in this little game, as the high princes just try to have fun while they fight. And then you have Dalinar, who's trying to embody a little bit more and be a better person, while simultaneously he still doesn't actually, growing up in the culture that he grew up in, he doesn't understand how terrible it is for those people who are not nobility as they are. And they have a very weird caste system in this series. So basically, if you are a light eyes, you are nobility automatically. It doesn't mean you're a high prince, but it means you're automatically better than anyone who has dark eyes. So it's racism, but it's not really racism, because you could be of any race and have light eyes, and then you're automatically nobility. So it's a very, very specific aspect, and nobody knows where it came from, but it just basically started off that way. And now all the dark eyes are under the control of whatever light eyes. Even the lowest light eyes, someone who's barely nothing, can order around anyone who has dark eyes, and they have to be subservient to them. And Kaladin is a dark eyes, Dalinar light eyes, Shaolin is a light eyes. And so we're seeing this intermingling of these different aspects of the culture, where, you know, you have good people who are light eyes, but simultaneously still don't understand how terrible it is that they're just using dark-eyed people for their own purposes just because they have dark eyes. It doesn't make any sense, of course, especially to our modern perceptions. So it's a difficult kind of caste system to wrap your head around and judge people on, because it's so weirdly specific. Although there are obviously some people in here who are easily hateable because they're just pricks. So it's a massive book, and there's so much character development happening with it. I think one of the most amazing aspects of it is Brandon really made probably one of the most quotable books of life. There's so much good philosophy in this book. There's so much great character development. There's so much striving to be better and improve, and simultaneously show how someone who's just been beaten down by life, been traumatized, is in going through rounds of depression and all these things, is trying to work through all these feelings and emotions, especially in this kind of world which is so filled with violence and bloodshed and confusion and magic, and just these wide gaps between the rich and the poor. And as I said, this series probably has one of the most gameable and anime perfect qualities in terms of just how things are showcased. The spren within it, the magic system within it. We have our shard plates and shard blades within it, which are these massive weapons and armors that are used by the high princes to fight. And they can basically sear away people's souls automatically as they cut through people. And so these are just awe-inspiring within the series, and they're amazing to watch and read in battle, and they would be amazing if they were showcased in an anime. We also have obviously the abilities of the surge binders. So there are people within the world who have the capacity to absorb what's called stormlight. So there are these massive storms within the series that happen, and they can imbue these gems, different kinds of gems that are within the series. And people who are surge binders can absorb this energy, and then it makes them stronger, faster. And certain ones, depending on what kind of surge binder they are, they have different abilities, like being able to manipulate their environment, latch themselves onto things, so hang off ceilings, even basically throw people around and bind people together. And that's one of the reasons why the villain Seth is so difficult for people to fight, because he is one of these surge binders. And so there's all these different aspects of magic within the series that are kind of merged in, and different people showcase them in different ways, although they all kind of come from the high storms and the stormlight and how that functions. So it's super, super fascinating. We just have amazing action, amazing depth of character development, loads of world building, really, really interesting multiple variants of enemies and political scheming, and just it's just all over the place. So this series has everything already contained just within this first book. And as you can imagine, the world is just growing, and the depth of development and scheming and all that is just growing and growing between the books. So I highly recommend checking out The Way of Kings. I love it. It's Brandon's probably masterwork at this point. There are 4 books out currently. I will be reviewing the other 3. Then there'll be the 5th book, and I'm pretty sure there's supposed to be another 5 books after that are based within the world. So this is the kind of series that will keep you going for a really, really, really long time. I mean, not even counting the fact that each book is 1,000 pages, so it takes forever to read. So I would check it out if I were you, if you just want to have a falutin good time and really, really just get absorbed in a world. There's so much to see in this series. It's crazy. So yeah, enjoy, check it out. Let me know what you think down below. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm gonna go take a nap because I'm super exhausted. It's been a pleasure, everyone. Peace.